Okay, here we go again. So this will be, let's get this sorted out here. This will be the lecture 1 for Econ 311. So this lecture is on mercantilist economic thought. I'm going to shoot for about a half hour, give or take, for this. So of course that's shorter than it would be in class. So I'm going to be moving through things relatively quickly. So let's get right into it. So when we're talking about mercantilist economic thought, we're talking about a period of economics really before there was any systemic thinking about economics. Of course, as long as there's been philosophy, as long as there's been people commenting on the state of society or the good society, there's always been discussions of economy and economics. So economy, as we probably all know at this stage, of course, is the process of procuring, refining, and allocating products within society. And since that's something we go about generally as a society, right, or collectively, economics is a social science, a study of how we interact with each other, particularly in these aspects of life that refer to, getting the stuff we need, making it into things that are more useful to us, and then allocating them out to the people who we feel need them or should have them for some reason. Of course, all living beings at all times have to go about this type of activity, and so really there's always been writings on economics, going back to at least Aristotle in ancient Greece. Aristotle, of course, never developed a systemic theory of economic activity, like, say, you might study in modern macroeconomics, and certainly no real theory of markets like you would study in microeconomics, but yet he had a lot to say about economic activity. During the period after the fall of Greek civilization, or ancient Greek civilization, as well as ancient Rome, right? It's in the medieval era. It's a continuing sort of limited discussions on economic activity. Of course, as one would expect during the medieval period in Western thought, so in that would be in European thought at the time, most of the writings on economic activity actually come out of the church, right? Because at least prior to the Reformation, the Catholic Church is really the really keeper of the intellectual flame, if you will, in Western society. And then after the Reformation, it's a combination of Lutheran and other Protestant churches, and then the Catholic Church as well, that really are that. There's a reason why we wear robes still to this day at graduation that look a lot like priest garments, because we really come from the same sort of zone. It's only in the modern era, so actually after the mercantile area, where there's this really significant shift in breaking between academia and sort of the religious world, or the church, the world of the church. So what we see in these ancient writings prior to really even the mercantilist era, but prior to 1600, prior to the development of world trade and all that, are a few common themes. The first of those themes is the idea of a just wage. Now, sometimes people think of just wage as sort of a modern, sort of idea, right? That, that's something that, maybe quote unquote liberals invented recently. My cat, he wants to go sit up in the window over there. He's not gonna. But actually, the idea of a just wage is one of the oldest ideas in economics, if not the oldest idea in economics. I've put a link here, and of course the PowerPoint is already up separately from this, so you can click through that link and read the stuff. And throughout all these presentations, I'll have sort of click-through links. But, the essence of the early sort of thinking on this stuff is, what is a moral wage? What is too little to pay somebody? If we go back to like St. Thomas Aquinas, Catholic scholar, right? If we go back to Aristotle, what we see is sort of this idea is that wages shouldn't pay less than it takes to keep a person alive. In other words, if you're working and your wages are insufficient for basic food, clothing, and shelter to keep you going as a human being, then that is an unjust wage, right? That's an unjust wage. And it may surprise you to find out that sort of thinking about these things in moral terms is really the oldest traditions in economics. I know when I first learned that in first year microeconomics class, that was one of the big things that drew me into economics that I found, really interesting. Because I'd always kind of thought economics, sort of money and bean counting and stuff like that. And, when done right, it's really quite a bit deeper than that. And so, these old debates are still out there. What do you think? What do you think a just wage is? Were those guys, was Aquinas right? Is there more to it, right? In addition to just wages, which is just a kind of price, right? We also see a lot of discussion about what is a just price in general. First of all, what is just, right? What is justice? These are important ideas. So some examples here. Is it moral? Is it just to raise prices on face masks during this pandemic? What about water during a drought? So the modern economist might say, well, yeah, of course, it's supply and demand, right? So demand goes up, so therefore more resources have to be brought to bear upon it, and therefore the price of those resources goes up due to rising marginal costs, and so therefore the supplier, of course, has a right to charge a higher price. Something that would be sort of the conventional microeconomics explanation of the morality of this. But of course, if you go out to the person in the street, they're not going to buy that argument. They're going to have different ideas about it. And so, what is justice, and it is the implied morality of microeconomics moral? Yeah. Throughout most of human history, we've had a lot of different ideas about this. The sort of modern economic idea, of course, is ubiquitous within the field, or nearly ubiquitous, I should say, not completely. But still within broader society, I would say the economics perspective, modern economics perspective, is gaining additional, more and more traction, becoming to dominate modern policy, but certainly isn't really consistent with social morality. And I always find it's interesting to know that these ideas really go way, way back. A third recurring theme throughout early economics. I'm getting way ahead of myself here. Sorry, I really don't like the way this scrolls. And a third common theme throughout, really early economic thought is the idea of ownership. When do I have the right to control nature, natural resources, goods and services? Again, it's one of those things that we sort of think of as obvious. I paid for it, so it's mine. Okay. Well, if there's 10 people in a desert and 50 gallons of water, and you paid for all 50 gallons, is it yours? Can you just let them die? The rest of them, right? Everybody else? Probably you're all saying, oh, no, of course I can't do that, right? I can't do that. Well, then ownership is contingent, right? It's contingent upon some underlying notion of morality. One of the most famous modern arguments for ownership, and by famous, meaning that we use it a lot, right? Even though if we don't know it. It was put together by a guy named John Locke, 500 years ago now. You should look up Locke if you haven't done so already, or you aren't familiar with Locke's works, because Locke is important to understanding Western philosophy, and really important to understanding Western law, which is central to everything we do to this day. And Locke has kind of a neat argument about ownership. Locke says that, well, let's start by saying we own ourselves. Okay? Right? So we own ourselves as physical entities. And so that's our first assumption. And the second assumption is that, well, the natural world is given to us by some higher entity. Let's say God, for lack of maybe a better term. Okay. And that natural environment is given to us all. Okay? And then let's say I go and I there's a tree out there, right? And I need to make a house. And I chop that tree down. And I cut the tree up and I turn it from a tree into a house. Okay. All right. Well, Locke says, I have interacted with nature and improved upon it for my purposes. And I have put myself into the tree, if you will. The tree is not a tree anymore. It is now a house, and it is a house because of my actions. And since I own myself, and I've put myself into the tree, therefore now I own the house. Okay. Now that's not the end of Locke's argument. If it was, it would be rather simple and pretty boring. Okay. What if, well, I need a really, really big house. And I chop down all the trees and make it into a giant, giant house. Okay. As a consequence, there's no trees left for anybody else, right, to make their houses. Can I own all that? Locke's answer is no, you cannot. It's not just. You cannot withhold resources. You cannot withhold God's resources from others if you're not using them somehow yourself. You cannot hoard the natural environment under Locke. In other words, the right to property is qualified. It's qualified. What can I use? What component of God's resources can I realistically use? Beyond that, my right to property is qualified. Now, the argument is getting more interesting. Locke has an additional qualification. Locke notes that 500 years ago by Locke's time, money was not nearly as commonplace as it is today, but still everybody would have understood in his time, in the 1600s, in what is now Great Britain or England, would have understood what money was. And Locke gives money a very central place. And he says, well, you can accumulate vast amounts of wealth in not what we would say today nominal terms or in money terms. And then you're holding a whole bunch of wealth, but you're not withholding the resources of nature from others. And so that's ownership. You can hold huge quantities of monetary or nominal wealth without damaging others. In other words, there's the beginnings of the idea of trade as a net sum gain there. And the argument becomes pretty sophisticated then. So you can have very, very, very wealthy people without there being any qualifications on that ownership, any injustice due to that ownership. But it is not an unqualified argument. And so when we look at modern law in the United States or in Great Britain or most of Europe, I'm less familiar with the legal environments for the rest of the world, so please don't take this as an indictment of other legal environments. I don't know enough about them to say whether they're historically consistent with Locke or not. Okay, right? So we look at American law, or we look at German law or English law. We all see these qualifications on private property, right? And generally speaking, certainly the case in American law, those qualifications really center around these sort of Lockean themes, if you will. Are you unduly hoarding resources? Are you hoarding face masks during a pandemic? Are you hoarding? We'll eventually get to the question of to be immunized. I'm losing the word right now of the you get an injection, right? For this COVID stuff. Hopefully soon, right? But if I have that, can I hoard it from the population as a whole? And for sure, U.S. law is going to say no, right? Other depending on where it's invented, right? Other nation states may come to different conclusions, but you can be sure that if a cure is invented in the United States or in Great Britain for that matter, or France or Germany or any of these sort of countries that their legal systems build upon sort of Enlightenment era reasoning, they're going to say no. They're going to have qualifications on private property. And so it's very, old, very old discussion in economics, and with a lot of interesting thoughts. You see here, I've got, stuff going back to Plato here in the links. So it's again ancient Greece. All right, let's move on. It's probably enough on that. Another common theme that we see in early economic thought is public versus private interests. What's the role of the state? What is the role of the individual? What are the reasonable limitations on individual action? So we just talked about Locke, right? And limitations on private property, which would obviously have to be enforced by the state, right? Is that a legitimate breakdown? Should the state enforce those limitations on private property? Of course, the state has to enforce private property in the first place, right? Private property doesn't mean anything without some kind of social authorization of it. So where do the rights of the individual begin? Where do the rights of the individual end? What about the rights of society? Does society have rights? Okay. Here in this slide, I have a picture from one of my favorite TV shows called The Prisoner. It's old. It was old when I was first introduced to this when I was in college, and it was old then. It ran in 1967, and I think into very early 1968. It's one season. Anyway, it's in my opinion remains a fascinating TV show. For sure, you've seen lots of references to it in more common or more modern television shows. Without maybe even knowing it, if you watch all the episodes of The Prisoner, you'd be like, wait a second, that was in this episode of Friends or whatever. And yeah, that's right. But the whole premise of this show is what is the place of the individual in society? So anyway, there's a couple clips here embedded in it. They're all pretty crazy, right? Actually, I was just watching these now, a couple hours ago as I was putting this together, and it just makes me smile, right? Because it's so like wacky, it's so like 60s, right? Like, whoa, far out, man, whereas modern television is so gritty and drama and realistic, and the camera's shaky because you just don't know, which, personally I hate that stuff. So it just makes me smile to go back and watch these sort of old TV stuff that's just like, wacky and far out. And at the same time, really philosophically pretty deep. So, there's the cat again. All right, let's keep moving on. So, getting in then to mercantilist economic thought. So this is really the first time when we have, sort of scholarly folks trying to think about economics as sort of something we're going to study on its own, like that has its own reasoning apart from, maybe conventional moral reasoning or teachings of the church or social philosophy or anything like that. No, we're going to study economics. Like, how does this thing work? How do markets work? How do economic systems develop? And this is really the beginnings of what's occurring during the late years of the Renaissance and during sort of the period of Enlightenment philosophy. And indeed, Western economics in general is a product of Enlightenment era philosophy. It is liberal in the original sense of that word, not necessarily Democratic Party liberal or whatever you want to call sort of that. No, liberal in the sense of liberty, liberal, individualistic, so on. Okay. And it covers, mercantilists kind of like 1600 to 1750. So there's a whole bunch of authors during this time period that are writing, and they have a bunch of different ideas, right? So it's not really fair to lump them all into one sort of mono thought, right? But we're sort of going to do that here today, right? We're sort of going to do that. And the reason why we're going to do that is we're really going to use mercantilism to do a couple things. First, to think about, so what are some ideas that people have about it? So some really early ideas about how economics works, right? And then also kind of to use it as an example of how not to do things, because these early authors made some pretty significant, errors is too harsh of a word, because they're kind of right within what they're trying to do. But, as we'll see, there's really no clear stated goals. What are they really trying to explain? There's no clearly stated assumptions. There's what at least would appear to be some pretty significant errors. Again, if you think they're trying to achieve what it seems like they're trying to achieve, then there's stuff that's just wrong, right? If we're kind, right, and we theorize alternative objectives, then maybe they're right? Then maybe they're right. But we'll see. Okay. So we can boil, and this is again unfair to do, but we have to get through this stuff, and so we're going to kind of boil down mercantilism to really a key idea, right? And that is economic growth, and specifically, how can a nation state enrich itself? And when modern commentators refer to mercantilism, that's what they usually mean, right? They usually mean a series of economic policies by which the nation state can empower itself, not the individual can maximize their wealth or sort of the maximization of economic surpluses a la modern microeconomics. No, we're talking about how can a nation state become powerful. So, I can remember when I was a student in the early 1990s, and we used to still talk about Japan as an economic powerhouse, right? A lot of economists referred to Japanese economic policy of the 1960s through the 1980s as sort of neo-mercantile, okay, in the sense that the Japanese government really used economic policy as a tool towards the empowerment of the nation state. Nowadays, you sometimes hear commentators refer to Chinese economic policy as neo-mercantile. And indeed, some foreign commentators, we never refer to ourselves this way, right? But some foreign commentators refer to President Trump's economic policy as neo-mercantile, right? Okay, and there's some honesty to all of those, whether it be Japan, China, or the United States under President Trump just recently. Which is, if you're taking my trade class, right? There's actually been Trump administration's a pretty significant break from the past in terms of a lot of economic policy. But if you're thinking like, doesn't every president break? No. In fact, the economic policy of the United States is roughly consistent from at least the Eisenhower administration through the Obama administration, right? So we're talking like mid-50s, 1950s through the 2010s, right? So a long time, right? U.S. foreign policy, U.S. trade policy was moving in a certain direction, right? Now it's changed direction. Okay. So, this is somewhat understandable in mercantile thought because these writers, the writers of the 1600s and early 1700s, they weren't teaching freshmen macroeconomics or whatever. They weren't writing economic textbooks for the masses. What were they doing? Well, they were teaching kings and other statespeople how to do policy, right? So, if you're living in 1650, regular people, the kids of regular people don't go to college. They don't learn economics. Even if you're, the kid of a fairly affluent businessman, you're not going to college to learn economics, right? Who's learning economics? Politicians are learning economics. Future kings, right? Statespeople, the leaders of extremely large and powerful companies. So the equivalents of like the modern Apple, right? The Apple of the 1600, or the I would say General Motors, but maybe not even General Motors today, right? General Motors ain't what it used to be. But if you think about the really, really powerful entities, they're the ones that are learning economics, right? So the audience is somewhat different, right? Somewhat different. If we take that into consideration, mercantilist thought makes a little more sense. All right, one of the things that we see fairly consistently through the wide variety of mercantilist authors is a real focus on balance of trade issues. That is, the relationship of imports and exports and the associated financial flows with them. And this is perhaps what mercantilism is best known for. It's the idea that you should export lots of goods and services, and then as a consequence bring in a lot of nominal resources or money, right, or gold, right? So goods and services should flow out of the nation and gold should flow in. That's the desirable policy from the mercantilist perspective. We hear that today, right? I mean, you might have been thinking like, well, yeah, right, okay, well, right, for sure, there's people who advocate essentially that today, right? So it's not mercantilist, but it runs along the same line of reasoning. People get all excited that we're a net exporter of basic resources like oil and natural gas. We're energy independent. We're exporting. I don't know. I mean, I look at my daughter, she has all this energy, right? And like me, I have less energy because I'm old, right? And I think like, geez, I don't want to export any of my energy. Can I import some energy, please? So it's always strange for me. Sort of, we kind of take all these things for granted. Like, of course we want to not import oil, export oil. Well, it's not so obvious to me that makes sense, right? But to the mercantilists, it made a lot of sense. We want to export stuff, right? And then we want to bring all the money back here. We want to bring all the gold back here. Okay. So, the idea is to have a net inflow of income, excuse me. And that's how we're going to do it, right? That's how you win. That's how you win everything. And let's just see. Okay, so let's follow that argument through a little bit. Let's think. So we want to send stuff abroad, and then we want to bring in money. Well, why do we want to do that? Well, in mercantilist thought, there's this focus on really the nominal. Really what we would call a nominal. That is money, as opposed to land, labor, physical capital, right? Which was certainly Adam Smith's focus. So when we move past the mercantilist era, we get into the classical era. Adam Smith, or Karl Marx is the same for that matter, right? Is their focus is on the maximization of physical resources, but not so in mercantilist thinking. The focus is on the acquisition of nominal resources. And again, you're probably already getting the feeling like, well, that seems kind of silly. Like, why would they do that? But we do this all the time to this day. Right. So when was the last time you heard, well, the United States government's running out of money, or we can't afford that as a people? Well, that's a focus on the nominal. You're making the nominal your constraint. You're making the nominal your objective as an economic policy. Of course, that's what the mercantilists did, right? That's what they did. When we see somebody else doing it, it looks a little silly. But when we do it ourselves, right, we tend not to notice, right? But as economists, we have to really move past this. We have to see things in more objective terms. We have to be much more clear about what our economic objectives are and whether there's any real logical sense for those objectives. So, this slide is kind of hitting home what we've already been getting towards or working towards. But, as economists, we need to think past that. Okay, so we want to accumulate money. Well, why? What do we want with the money, right? Do we want cookies? Do we want to just make a big bed of money that we can roll around in? Do we want to be able to take pictures of the pile of money so we can post them on Instagram and show everybody how rich we are? What's the point here of getting all this money? In most cases, the point's going to be, it's going to be some physical end at the end of the day, right? I want this money so I can get a cool ass car. Okay, well, that's real, right? It's not nominal. Well, I want all this money so I can tell people what to do, right? And they do it. Okay, well, what you want to do is command labor then, right? So the point is not the money. You just want to be a boss, right? You want to be able to boss people around. Or you would say, I want all this money because then I, get the girls or the guys or whatever. If I have a lot of money, they'll come. Okay, well, what you want then is you want to be able to buy the stuff, right? That attracts the girls or the guys, or you want the girls or the guys themselves, right? That's the end, right? That's the objective. Okay, so the money isn't really the objective, and if you start modeling or thinking about the money as the objective, you're likely to make errors in your work, right? In your analysis. So being clear about what the objectives is of critical importance. It's critical importance, right? So, for example, the last one, you get all the money, right, and you still look like a doofus and act like a doofus. You're probably that many girls or guys are going to be forthcoming, right? There's probably a little more to it than just having the money. Okay, or maybe you get the wrong kind of girls or guys that you really didn't want in the first place, right? So being clear about what your objectives is important. A quick side story here. So I used to live in Arabia, and it's a common phrase in Arabia. You can't eat the oil, right? So objectives, right? Here in the United States, those oil-rich countries got it made, right? They got all that oil, so they can get all the money, right? Okay. Can't eat the oil, right? So you need to sell the oil to get food. Okay, so it's be careful what you wish for. Understand, what actually makes an economy strong. Okay, so let's dig into the logic of this nominal objective, right? Of the idea of money. All right. Well, let's say I get a bunch of money. No, let's say I get all the money. Right? So you don't have any money, right? Nobody else has any. I have all the money. Well, who wants money then? Right? So if all of society has no money, probably they've figured out some alternative source of money besides the money I have. If they haven't, they're probably operating with some kind of barter system, right, to get the goods and services they need. In either case, like the money I have has been rendered obsolete to the economic process. All right, so think about that for a little bit. All right, let's think even in more just straightforward economic terms. Let's say, as a nation state, we get all the money. The United States gets all the money from all the world, right? Well, wouldn't that make the prices of goods and services then more expensive? After all, we have a lot of money, but not a lot of goods and services. So then by the laws of supply and demand, shouldn't the price of money fall relative to the price of goods and services? In other words, inflation? Of course, right? So even our goal to attempt to amass nominal resources is to a certain extent self-defeating, right? In doing so, we actually fail to do what we're trying to do. Now, this may seem fairly straightforward. Wouldn't mercantilist authors, thinkers, have gone through the same thought exercise we just went through? Probably. Probably understood this. Can't be sure. A couple of the authors, like Thomas Munn, one of the most distinguished mercantilist authors, was certainly aware of this, right? Was certainly aware of this problem that I just mentioned, right? So then if at least some mercantilist authors were aware of this problem, then why is there still this sort of overriding goal of accumulating nominal resources? Well, it may be that the answer was so obvious at the time to both the writers and the audience that it didn't even require mentioning. For example, if I show you there's no clock on the wall behind me, but imagine there's a clock on the wall behind me, I ask you what time it is. I don't need to tell you how to read the clock. You know that if both the hands are pointing up, straight up, it's about 12 o'clock. Okay? I don't have to explain to you that 12 means something, right? I don't have to explain to you the orientation of the hands. I don't have to explain any of these things to you. You understand it implicitly. Okay. So maybe the accumulation of nominal resources to both the mercantilist authors and the people they were writing to, remember, statesmen, leadership, kings, queens, so on and so forth. Maybe it was so obvious why you would do that they didn't even need to say it. That's probably the case, right? Here there's a little cartoon here. There's a couple cartoons I have, mercantilism. You probably can't see it very well in this presentation, but I've already uploaded just the PowerPoint so you can see it much more clearly and much larger there. But here we have the idea that what you're doing is you're bringing in basic goods and services and then also money, right? As a mercantilist power. And then, what are you going to use that money for? Well, you have to remember that at this time, so this is early years of modern nation states. In the United States, we have a standing army, right? There's always an army in the United States. They're paid in U.S. dollars, which are fiat, which is, basically we can never run out of those, right? For reasons I just talked about. China, the same, right? Great Britain, the same. Australia, the same. Japan, any developed or even developing countries is the same. They have these standing armies, but that wasn't the case back then. You needed to raise an army. It's also the case that you generally didn't have large quantities of standing military equipment. So if you're going to, if you're Great Britain in 1600 and you need to fight a war, you're going to go need to commission ships. You're going to go need to hire private artisans and manufacturers to produce those vessels. And you're going to have to pay them. You can't just tell them to do it for the queen. Okay, right? You're going to have to get paid. And so it's very likely that when mercantilists were explaining to statespeople about the importance of importing nominal resources, it's very likely that would have been self-evident that the reason why you want to do that is you want to have a vast amount of nominal resources at your command at any given time so that you can redirect production to your end whenever you feel like it. In other words, if you want to shift the economy from producing, hose and wheelbarrows and sackcloth clothes for your peasants or whatever into making a war machine overnight, you can do that, right? You can do that. If you want to go and invade some other countries because you want to get their stuff, you can do that. You'll have the nominal resources available to go out and redirect production, as you want it. Just like if you're a multi-millionaire, you walk into a Burger King, they'll you can tell them to make whatever burger you want, right? You're like, I want a burger, made with French fries, whatever. You show them $1 million, they're gonna make a burger with French fries. Okay, so you can redirect production really however you want, right? That's very likely what the mercantilists were thinking and on about. Okay, so here in this slide I have another little comic, right? Mercantilism. These are the only two comics I could find on mercantilism. Wow, shocker, right? Okay. Why aren't more cartoonists writing cartoons about mercantilism? Yeah. Okay, so these bullet points here kind of go through what I was just talking about a few minutes ago. We're talking to policymakers, and at the same time we're talking to policymakers who need to be able to purchase from the private sector large amounts of goods and services to enact their will. then maybe there's some sense to all this, right? That's not it's not what we would say in modern economics, right? But that actually might, if we were to go out to like somebody in the street, that might make more sense. Like, well, you want to get a lot of money so you can tell people what to do, right? Okay, sure, right? They're be like, yeah, that's right. that's what I'm on about, right? That's what my economy is about, right? Well, it's a mercantilist economy, right? It's a mercantilist economy. All right, let's keep rolling here. It's a pretty long presentation. Let's see here. This is Thomas Mudd. This is his picture here in this one, right? So let's look at mercantilism in a little more detail, right? So how do you get to this balance of trade position? How does that all work? What are some of the, how is this inflationary pressure managed, so on and so forth, right? Okay, so we really have three components. Well, there's four, right? But a fourth one is kind of a component of one of the three. So of these three components, we have this importance of the national military and the ability to construct a military force that is formidable and on short notice. Second is the idea of what's referred to as creeping inflation, which is actually a pretty straightforward concept, probably not something you've learned about before. And then finally, the idea of popular austerity. Austerity here having the meaning that we normally attribute to it, of being frugal, right? So let's take a look at each of those. This is Sir James Stewart here, who's also quite famous. He's probably the most complete of the mercantilist authors, in the sense that he really put together a whole theory of economy. But let's think about nominal resources perspective of the nation state. So nominal resources can be taxed, right? They can be used to purchase weaponry from the population, right? So if you have gunsmiths, if you have cannon makers, if you have shipbuilders, so on and so forth, you have gold. You can use that gold to purchase that physical output from those suppliers, and indeed even from suppliers abroad if need be. And then finally, you can use that weaponry to take the desired output resources from other nations. Okay, hang on there. Whoa. That's certainly something we don't not a focus of modern economics, but certainly is a focus of mercantilist economics. This idea that we're going to build weaponry, we're going to build things, we're going to use those things to get money, and then we're going to use that money to buy weaponry, and then we're going to use that weaponry to take the stuff back. Yeah, okay, so that's mercantilism. I've got a little video later on that sort of goes through this. Maybe I'll even show the video here in this, but okay. So let's go through each of those things. All right, so of course we already talked about the problem of inflation, right? So I accumulate all these nominal resources. Aren't I just going to drive prices up with those? Yeah, you are, right? You are going to drive prices up. Richard Cantillion, who's another mercantilist author, he's probably the one who had the best figured out of all the mercantilists. And so today in economics, we refer to this idea of creeping inflation as Cantillion effects. Okay, it's a Cantillion effect. So if you ever hear an economist talk about Cantillion effects, this is what they're talking about. And what Richard Cantillion noted is that the first people who spend in an inflationary environment are able to take advantages of low prices. In other words, inflation doesn't all happen in all places at once. Okay, I'll say that again. Inflation doesn't happen in all places at all times at once, right? So it's not like I walk out the door here and every price is 10% more than it was yesterday. That's not how inflation generally works. What happens is that some prices go up, other prices remain the same. And then eventually, in an inflationary environment, all prices go up. But again, not at the same time. There's ones that go up first, second, third, fourth, fifth, so on and so forth. They go up sort of piecemeal. And what Cantillion noted is if you're the first person with the money, you get to take advantages of lower prices. And if you're the last person with the money, you don't. Okay? So if the state is relatively early purchaser of goods and services. The existence of nominal resources in and of themselves do not necessarily mean higher prices. What leads to higher prices is a shortage of real resources against nominal resources. That is to say, demand pull inflation. There's not enough seats for the Britney Spears concert or whatever have you. Okay, so ticket prices go up. So if the state is relatively early in its purchases in a future inflationary environment, it gets to take advantages of low prices. Okay, so although inflation is almost certain to occur in a nominal rich environment, if you can be relatively early in expenditures, you can mitigate most, perhaps even all, of those effects, the Cantillion effects. Okay. Finally, popular austerity. Now, this one, there's the least sort of clarity from mercantilists. Because some of them probably, so I said earlier, it's possible they just have this whole real and nominal thing messed up, just like some people do, like, well, I want to get money. Why do you want to get money? I don't know, just money, right? Okay, right. That's not a very good theory of economy, right? And it's probably true that some of the mercantilists really, didn't, but others did, right? Okay, so if we read and we get different ideas here, right? And there are different ideas about the role of consumption by regular consumers and how important that is for the economy. Of course, in modern macroeconomics, we all know that consumption makes up about 71% of U.S. economic spending today, right? So it's tremendously important. Indeed, there's nothing that's more important, right, than consumer spending. Okay, but in mercantilism, it's way less clear. And to be fair, people were a lot poorer back then, and certain people were a lot richer, right? So the income distribution was way, way worse. So maybe it made more sense not to spend so much time on it. But what we find in some mercantilist writers is that it's really important to buy luxury goods, for rich people to buy luxury goods, and not so much in the mercantilists, but particularly in the physiocrats, which we'll talk very briefly about at some point in time in probably the next lecture. It's really important, right? And the thinking there is really kind of Keynesian, right? The thinking is Keynesian in the sense demand-based economic thinking. The thinking, with those mercantilists is that, geez, the rich people are getting all this money, right, from stuff, and like if they don't spend it somehow, like that money is going to get stuck, and then the rest of the economy is going to be short of money, which could cause deflation across the economy. Here, my cat's finally come to say hi. Here's this is Max. There you go. He knows what his name is. You're going to go away for a little while. Go over there. All right. So the thinking is, right, our rich people got all money. You got to return that fixed quantity of money to the economy somehow, right? Because it's not a fiat system like now. So you got to get it back in. Okay, well, make sure that rich people buy, like luxury goods from like artisans and things like that. And that way the money will return back into the economy and keep sort of what we would think of today as sort of circular flow going, right? Circular flow from Econ 104. So that's sort of one line of reasoning here. Well, consumer spending. Hey, little guy. We're going to open your window. So here, hang on just a second, all right? There you go. Window's open. He's happy. All right. Now, the other line of reasoning here is kind of what we've been talking about already, is that any sort of extra money of the relatively affluent or the merchant class needs to be taxed up by the state, right? And then the state should be using that money to buy military goods and services. So the arguments are similar, right? But in one, you get the idea that this inflow of capital should be used to just keep the economy going, right? And so rich people need to buy rich people stuff like the yachts and cool shit like that. In the other one, it's that the state should be using these nominal resources to empower the nation state and of course the nation as a whole, right? That's really the one that predominates, that later idea. So say logically speaking, it probably makes more sense. After all, how can hoping that rich people buy stuff from local merchants be a sensible. I'm saying this tongue in cheek, right? So those of you who really know your economics well know why I'm doing that, right? But how can this idea that rich people will just buy stuff locally from artisans and therefore keep the economy going be a sound? All right, I'm just going to reveal the joke, right? This is sort of what's common, we call sort of trickle-down economics, right? Essentially the same idea, right? Which nobody in economics really takes very seriously. It's taken seriously in some political circles, but yeah, nobody really buys that in serious economics. Okay, so going back to this other idea, that the state's going to use these nominal resources to buy military goods and services. Okay, I have this. Oh no! Okay, I have this little video from Family Guy here, right? Actually, I didn't embed this one very well, but if you click on this link, what you get is to a short clip from this TV show Family Guy, which by the way I do not endorse. It's a terrible show. You should not watch it. I think even the creators say something to that effect. But this little one part of the episode is quite illustrative of mercantilist economic thought. All right, so Stewie, that's this little kid with the baseball right down there, is at a baseball game. That's still from the video, right? Okay, so Stewie, this little character, and Stewie is he's not a good person, right? He's always trying to do bad things. Anyway, he's at a baseball game, and he's just caught a fly ball. So the baseball he has there is one that was in play. It's gone out into the stadium, and he's caught it, right? And he notices that the child next to him has a baseball bat. Right? Sometimes they give away bats at the game and things like that. So probably this other kid has been given a bat. So Stewie has the game ball, right, which everybody wants. Everybody wants a game ball. Hot commodity, right? The other kid has the baseball bat. Okay, so Stewie turns to the kid and says, this is in the clip. This is what the clip is. Stewie turns to the other kid and says, I'll trade you my baseball for that bat you have, right? And the other kid's, of course, wants a game ball, right? Who doesn't want a game ball? Stewie gives him the ball, takes the bat, hits the kid over the head with the bat, and takes the ball back and says to him, I hope you've learned something here. Okay, so he's got the ball, he's got the bat. Other kid's got a conk on the head and nothing. That's mercantilism. Okay? That's mercantilism. So we're going to give you, the rest of the world, consumer goods and services. We're going to take your money. We're going to use your money to buy weaponry. And then we're going to conk you over the head with that weaponry and take our goods and services back, as well as your raw materials. Okay? That's what mercantilists are trying to do, right? That's what the sort of mercantilist argument is. That's what the point of a political economy should be. Now you might be thinking, take a step back and be like, whoa, that's a grim worldview. Yeah, it sure as hell is. If that's if you think that's kind of dog eat dog, yeah, that's right. It is. There's really no question about it. Okay. I don't like that world. Just let you know. Okay. So within all this, there's another more subtle component too. I mean, not subtle in the sense that it's the Stewie thing isn't a good explanation. It's an excellent explanation. But another thing here is that what we're trying to do with mercantilism, or what mercantilist authors are implying, is that we really need to try to capture as a nation what's commonly called today. If you take a business class, talk about value added, right? And we talk about value added in economics too. The idea here is you want to capture maximum value added, right? So you don't want to do things like export raw materials, and this is where it's inconsistent with modern, weird thinking about why we should export oil, right? That doesn't even make sense from a mercantilist perspective. That doesn't make sense from any perspective at all. But people seem to like that idea, so I guess politicians like it. But mercantilists, they want to import raw materials and then export finished goods and services, because that way, you get more money, right? Because there's more value added, right? So you export your natural resources, you lose stuff that you could use to make other stuff, and you don't get a lot of money. because not a lot of value added. Okay, so mercantilist thought, you want to maximize value added. Now you may say, how is it different from modern economic thought? Well, modern economic thought wouldn't place any qualifications on that. Modern economic thought would say you should export in areas where you have comparative advantage, right? So that might be natural resources, it might be other things. But from a mercantilist perspective, you want to maximize value added. All right, this is going longer than I thought. How many slides do we have here? Geez, a lot of stuff. Okay, so nominal and real wealth, kind of quickly, just hitting on that theme again. You can take more time with this in the PowerPoints, I think, in your own. But what is the point of money? Don't confuse the two. Like, what are you really trying to achieve here? You're really trying to achieve nominal wealth, or are you really trying to achieve some kind of real wealth? Okay. I don't know, but at least we should know, right? We should make our objectives clear. So here's this slide, right? So when we're thinking about doing economic theorizing or economic modeling, we want to be clear. What are we trying to achieve here? What does the developed economy look like? What does the good or successful economy look like? What are its characteristics? What is more GDP good? I don't know. Is more money good? Is bigger military, is that good? Is that objectives? I don't know, and I don't have any answers. Now, obviously, if we look at a modern economic textbook, the idea, more GDP is good. Well, I don't know. I think personally, I would say productivity is good. I think I would say that personal fulfillment is good. I would say that a certain degree of social stability is good, but that's just me, right? You might have your own ideas, but we should certainly make those clear when we're developing economic models, what we're trying to do, right? And so the total failure to do this in the mercantilist literature. So all the stuff I've been talking about, like, okay, we're going to, Stewie, right? So we're going to use this. So none of that's ever stated, right? Clearly in the mercantilist literature is more like make stuff, sell stuff to other people, get money, call it good, right? And it just, all that just seems kind of stupid, right? And in fact, if you read like a modern economic textbook, if they mention mercantilism, it'll be like, yeah, mercantilism was stupid. Okay, well, yeah, because if you just read what's written, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and it just doesn't follow through. So, for this class studying history of economic thought, what we really want to understand from this is we want to understand the importance of knowing the literature, right? So first of all, mercantilist authors are saying all kinds of different things because nobody's reading, it's 1600, right? So maybe somebody in France doesn't know what somebody in England is saying because they've never heard of them or never read their stuff or anything like that, right? So you get sort of science proceeding and all these like weird shoots and stalks that are going off in different directions. But we have no excuse for that today, right? This thing called the internet, right? You should know what other people are doing, right? So if you're working on a particular problem, you should know what other people working on that problem have had to say. So know the literature, right? Speaking to the literature, what have other people said about this idea and what conclusions have they come to? Why do you think they're wrong if you think something different? Like, what evidence do you have that they're wrong? Be clear in that, right? Be clear in that. Be clear about what's already been said and where you're going forward from that, right? Mercantilist authors, there's none of that, right? It's like, I think this, right? And because I think it must make sense, right? Then finally, you make your assumptions and objectives explicit. What am I assuming about the nature of this problem? What am I trying to achieve, right? It's absolutely critical because otherwise people have to come back and try to figure out what the heck you're talking about. And you know what? In 99 out of 100 cases, they're not going to do that. They're just going to forget it, right? So make it clear what you're doing. All right. So the mercantilist story also gives us, and by the way, in all this, you really need to read the chapter on blog. I'm looking at here over my right-hand side. It's it's pretty dense, right, as blog generally is, but you should read it because there's way more in there about mercantilism and than really I can go through in this lecture, and you need to know that stuff. All right. So what's the point of economics? What are we trying to do here? What problems are we trying to resolve? What is economic development? What does it mean? If we have more money, is that economic development? What if we all have Maseratis? Is that economic development? But none of us can read? Yeah. What are our goals in our economy? What are our goals with our model? What are we doing, right? What are we doing? What is the point of nominal wealth? This is something people forget all the time, even today. Like you get even politicians will say oh, well, we're running out of money, or we got to get more money, or something like this, as if money somehow was socially scarce. I mean, money is not socially scarce. It's scarce for you or me, right, or for an individual business, or even for the state of Wisconsin. But for U.S. society, United States society, money is not scarce. Chinese society, money is not scarce. Japanese society, money is not scarce. What's scarce is stuff, right? So what's the point of accumulating this non-scarce resource? It seems kind of crazy. Like, it'd actually make more sense to accumulate like cookies or something like that, because they're actually scarce. You can run out of cookies. There can be no more sugar on the planet. So let's all have a cookie-based economy. And then, what is real wealth? This last question is Adam Smith's question. So you've heard The Wealth of Nations, right? The full title of Adam Smith's book is Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. I'll say that again. An inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations. In other words, Smith is asking, what is wealth and what causes wealth? Right? That's Smith's fundamental question. Right? His answer is pretty cool too, right? We'll see that in the next lecture. But mercantilism, what's the point of accumulating all this money? I don't know, right? I mean, the best answer we can give is that you can use it to wreck other people's countries, which, if that's the way the world's going to operate, we all aren't going to be here very long, right? So eventually there's going to be somebody with a bigger bat to hit us over the head harder than we ever could do, and that's not a good future. All right, I'll leave it there on that upbeat note, and we'll see you next time. By the way, if you're feeling down after this first lecture, well, Adam Smith is the ultimate optimist, right? So when we study Smith, it's a super rosy picture, right? It's really upbeat. It'll make you happy by the time you're done. All right, so that's note for the future. All right, thanks everybody. See you next time.